Thank you, Brent. Thank you, everyone, for being here this morning. As Multnomah County's District Attorney, I acknowledge the deeply rooted emotions involved in the nightly demonstrations that have unfolded in our community in response to the murder of George Floyd. These demonstrations are being used to righteously express grief, anger, and frustration over that senseless act of violence and the countless other abuses people of color have endured throughout history at the hands of the criminal legal system. It is important to me that the voices of the protesters be heard. And frankly, hearing alone is not enough. If we are going to be responsive to this current moment and the demands from the community who are calling for criminal justice reform, we must implement far more robust changes to this system. This policy on how my office will handle protest-related cases in the current context is just a start. This policy acknowledges that the factors that lead to the commission of criminal activity during a protest are incredibly complex. The protesters are angry, yes, deeply frustrated with what they perceive to be structural inequities in our basic social fabrics. And this frustration can escalate to levels that violate the law. Some of those violations are impermissible by any standard, resulting in physical violence, injury, and worse. Others represent the instinctive reactions of people who have been gassed repeatedly, who have been struck with kinetic projectile weapons, and who have seen other protesters arrested in ways that they deeply disapprove of. This policy acknowledges that centuries of disparate treatment of our black and brown communities have left deep wounds, and that the healing process will not be easy or quick. This policy acknowledges that our county dollars are extremely limited and that prosecutions should be guided by what the data tells us about how to best invest these dollars to maximize public safety, and that many people who have been arrested during these protests for low-level offenses come to us with little to no prior criminal history, and we have little to no reason to believe that they will reoffend. This policy acknowledges that interactions with criminal justice system can leave lasting consequences in foregone educational, housing, and economic opportunities, and the tools of this system must therefore be used sparingly. It is through that lens that I announce that moving forward, the District Attorney's Office will presumptively decline to issue criminal charges which result solely from the participation in a protest or mass demonstration when the most serious offense is either a city ordinance violation, such as a curfew violation, or when the crime does not involve deliberate property damage, theft, or the use or threatened use of force against another person. Crimes that presumptively fall under this category include interfering with a police officer, disorderly conduct, criminal trespass, escape in the third degree, harassment, and sometimes, in some circumstances, riot. I will also be directing my deputies to take a particularly hard look at cases involving resisting arrest and assault of a public safety officer if those cases occurred while an individual was being tear gassed or otherwise exposed to a use of force at the time of the resistance. Now, I've not described the entire policy, but I'm available to discuss aspects of it. I want to make it very clear, though, this is not a free pass. While I will do what I can to provide protesters with a forum to make their voices heard, I will not tolerate deliberate acts of violence against police or anyone else. Engage in that type of conduct, and you should expect to be prosecuted. Nor does this policy change Oregon law. Law enforcement retains the ability to arrest any person who they believe has violated any law, including those I've mentioned above. This policy recognizes that in order to advance public safety, we must not only prevent crime, but we must also promote the economic and housing stability, educational opportunities, strong family and community relationships, mental and physical health, and build trust with everybody in our community. And this is only the start. Thank you. I want to acknowledge all of the individuals who have helped me with this new policy, my transition team, a base of community members who are helping me put together policies as I transition into the district attorney's office. Here with me today are some members from my transition team, including Ricardo Lujan Valerio, Casey Jama, Kevin Modica, and Lakiana Drury. Also with me is Senior DDA Nathan Vasquez, who has been leading my office's efforts related to the protest cases. I've asked each of them to be here with me today to say a few words about their thoughts on this policy and the protests happening nightly on our streets. I'd now like to introduce Multnomah County Senior Deputy DA Nathan Vasquez, who supervises the Strategic Prosecution and Services Unit. Nathan will be providing an update on the number of cases that have been referred to our office since the beginning of these protests starting on May 29th. Thank you. DDA Vasquez.
Good morning. Thank you, DA Schmidt. My name is Nathan Vasquez, and I am the supervisor of our Strategic Prosecution and Services Unit. This unit has multiple responsibilities, including coordinating the district attorney's review and prosecution of criminal matters that occur during protest events. As District Attorney Schmidt just remarked, this new policy is designed to promote public safety and to ensure that we are using resources in a manner that holds people accountable when they intentionally harm someone else or destroy property. Our office has worked closely with law enforcement and community stakeholders from the very outset of these demonstrations, and we will continue to do so. There are two types of crimes in Oregon. There are felonies and there are misdemeanors. Since May 29th, approximately 550 cases have been referred to us for prosecution. Of those, about 150 are felonies, and we have issued approximately 50 felony cases. Of the remaining 100 felony cases, this office is either reviewing a large amount of evidence for those cases, or we have requested additional follow-up investigation. We have declined prosecution in some cases. The felony cases we have issued include arson, major assaults, felony-level thefts, felony vehicular crimes, and riots when they've been accompanied with violent or destructive behavior. The Strategic Prosecution and Services Unit is working with other units within the DA's office to review felony cases as they are submitted. Many of the felony cases require substantially more time to investigate and may require additional law enforcement investigation, such as interviewing witnesses and obtaining evidence. Now, switching to misdemeanors. The vast majority of cases that have been referred to our office by law enforcement are misdemeanors. For example, these crimes, such as DA Schmidt mentioned, include disorderly conduct and interfering with a peace officer. Based on our preliminary review, we have seen about 400 misdemeanor cases. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the court has dramatically reduced its operations. One of the biggest areas impacted is the processing of out-of-custody misdemeanor cases. These are cases where the suspect may have been arrested but is not held in jail, oftentimes bailed out. This is what happens in the vast majority of all misdemeanor cases. Typically, we are seeing out-of-custody cases such as these set over by the court anywhere from 7 to 9 weeks. At this time, we do not know exactly how many cases will be impacted by the new policy. It is our expectation and our intention that the majority of misdemeanor cases, with some limited exceptions, will be subject to the new policy. We'll be working to identify the cases that fall within the new policy and then to take steps to file the appropriate paperwork with the court when prosecution is declined. Currently, our office has a team of 10 deputy district attorneys who are in charge of reviewing all felony and misdemeanor protest-related cases. They are working with law enforcement and requesting investigative follow-up on many of those cases. I'd like to take this moment to thank them for all of their hard work in going through this very tedious and very important work. And I'd like to take this time to thank DA Schmidt for his in-depth conversations and consideration of this matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Senior DDA Vasquez. Now I'd like to ask Ricardo Lujan Valerio to come on up and say some words.
Thank you, DA Schmidt. My name is Ricardo Lujan Valerio. I am part of DA Schmidt's transition team. Thank you for providing this policy. I want to just remind folks that we are living in a time of reckoning. This is not business as usual. The incident with George Floyd's death was a catalyst to what we're seeing in the streets today, but it's not new to the community. This is something that's been happening to black and brown lives for a long time, and specifically the black community. So it's important to go back into the reason of why we see the protests, why we see people out in the streets today. It's to call for action and to call for true change in our systems. The system is not broken. It was never broken. It just wasn't built for us. And so when we are talking about changes to the system, we're not just talking about reform. We're not just talking about changing policies and dynamics within the system. It's actually trying to reimagine what public safety means to us. You know, across the board, black communities have experienced disproportionate rates of over-policing and incarceration than any other community. And that's not by mistake. It's part of the system. And so it's important for us to really think about what needs to happen for us to be able to come out of the moment that we are living in right now. We saw some of the actions that happened during the protests where federal agents that were unidentified using unmarked vehicles, throwing protesters into those vehicles. That's not new. That's the reality for the immigrant community on a daily basis. That's common practice for the Department of Homeland Security. So again, our communities have been living under these oppressive systems for a long time. And it's important for us to be able to step back and think about that. And I'd like to close it off just by saying that this calls for vast change in our system, both in the state level and the local level. Every jurisdiction has a responsibility to address this. Imagine Oregon is a coalition of organizations that just started. We need to be able to provide resources for spaces like Reimagine Oregon, where Unite Oregon, PALV, Urban League, a lot of the black-led organizations are leading those conversations. But during this time where we're asking them for solutions, where we're asking for change, it's important to also recognize we've never provided that space, that resource space for the community to think about what change truly looks like. So it's now time to put our money where our mouth is, invest in spaces like Reimagine Oregon, invest in spaces that are led by community to think about what the future looks like for us, and change policy. Not just change small things that will allow us to feel good about addressing the moment, but that would actually create new systems. This policy that DA Schmidt proposed today is just a small speck of what is truly needed. We're still working within the confines of the system, and we need something way larger than that. This is not the solution to what we're seeing today. It's a good step forward to get it, to addressing the moment, but we really need to think about what public safety means to us, what public safety means to those that have been historically and currently over-policed and oppressed, and how we can reimagine that. It's hard to believe that we wouldn't be able to do that after experiencing the centuries, decades of the same system. So I'm fortunate to be part of this transition team. I'm fortunate to be part of a team that's led by community from the get-go, and that displays the voices and the needs and the wants of the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo. Casey Jama.
Good morning, everyone. Casey Chama, Executive Director of Unite Oregon. First of all, I want to thank Mike Schmidt for his long time serving with our community. I worked with him many years, and I know he's a man with integrity. I want to just say a couple of things. First of all, I'm not going to comment on the policy itself. I'm not trying to pretend to be a lawyer. I'm not, and I'm not a constitutional expert. What I know is that what I'm interested in, and what Unite Oregon is interested in, is that holding accountable and allowing our community to be able to assemble freely, as the Constitution guarantees. freedom of assembly, it's important to me. As a refugee, former refugee from Somalia, that's one of the reasons that I came to this country. And that's one of the reasons that I want to make sure that what we are going to be holding accountable in this office, in the Multnomah County DA's office, it's not the policy itself, but the outcome of the policy. How many people has been convicted or persecuted, and what is the result outcome is for our community. That is what United Oregon is interested in. That's what I am interested, the outcome of this policy. We want to, again, ensure that people have ability to freedom to assemble and not persecuted because of that. I also want to remind us that why we're here. We're here because Black Lives Matter. We're here because our community, hundreds of years of oppression and racial injustices in the hands of not only the police departments, but also the system itself, which perpetuates injustices and racial discrimination that results in death in many times. There's not a week or day passes, even right now after George Floyd's death, that I don't open in the news and read another black man saying that I cannot breathe. I cannot breathe. I cannot breathe. That's why we're here. We want a long-term solution to reimagine our public safety. That's what I don't want today to be lost, that what we are pursuing is that not reforming the system, but completely changing how we do criminal justice system in this country and this state. As someone who's engaged this issue for many years, I want to make sure that our community members can trust that yesterday is not today. Whatever system that we had has to be reimagined. They have to trust us that this office, who in many times in the past, we know that, you can go online and research, that this office itself has been used to perpetuate racial disparities, racial discrimination in the hands of the system. So I want to make sure that when we're talking about this policy, again, I want to emphasize that we don't lose that picture, that what we're dealing with is that we want to reimagine the system itself, and we want to change the system. We're not trying to reform it. That's really the message that I want you to, as a community member, that I want to emphasize. I'm not interested to be creating another system that is perpetuating what I described. At the end, community has enough. There's expectations in this office. There's expectations for this community that we want to create and change a transparent system where, as I said earlier, at the end of the day, what we are counting is the outcome. There's too many policies that have been put forward many times, yet hardly anything changes. And I believe Mike is committed to that. And that's why I'm grateful to be part of the transition team. That's why I'm glad to be working with him. But again, we want to produce results that creates opportunity for our community to thrive and to be free from oppression and racial discrimination. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Casey. Mr. Kevin Modica.
Good morning. Thank you, District Attorney Mike Schmidt. It's been a moment when we first connected, and I think I grilled you for 3 hours about why you should be the District Attorney for Multnomah County. So, you know, from me to you, big congratulations. I recognize with the pandemic restrictions, there hasn't been a moment in the community to tell you to go to work and do your job. My name is Kevin Modica. I am part of District Attorney Schmidt's transition team. I was quite pleased to be asked to participate on that team. Doesn't make me special, but it makes me fortunate. I want to say to you this morning that law enforcement's response to violence has evolved over time. And really think about this. I'm sure this is not news to you, and many of you know the history of public safety, from constables and deputies to militias and police officers enforcing the laws of the land. In those beginnings, that included chattel laws and laws of possession. Things that people were allowed to possess were animals, land dwellings, slaves, indentured whites, women and children. And that being the case, the ability to treat and care for and dispose of were solely the absolute right of the owner, which in most cases was a white male. As you can imagine, most of the aforementioned officials supported a system that was oppressive. The practice was reflective of the social order of dominance and oppression. And so we are now experiencing the direct result of structural faults from that beginning of the system to professional policing, professional law enforcement, professional prosecution all across America. I think we're very fortunate to have Mike Schmidt as our district attorney. I think he's made the commitment not only during the campaign season, but in his first few days as district attorney to be proactive and not reactive, to be pro-social instead of non-social, to look out for the well-being of the citizens of Multnomah County, to say that you cannot be possessed, that you cannot be oppressed, that you have the right to assemble, you have the right to make your voice heard. I think Mike Schmidt is going to be very critical in ending the extraction of safety, health, and wealth from our communities, particularly black communities, brown communities, immigrant communities, and communities that call for social justice. I believe that it's been said before that where justice is denied and where poverty is enforced, where ignorance prevails, and where any one class is made to feel that society is an organized conspiracy to oppress, rob, and degrade them, to extract from them. Neither persons nor property can be safe if this is the order. There's been a demand for public safety, and that spans a very wide canvas. I say to all of you, we are fortunate to have Mike Schmidt as the #1 law enforcement official in Multnomah County. But I also say to DA Mike Schmidt, as the demand has been made, we will also be watching. We will hold you accountable. I think having a room of rivals is great. I think performative allyship is great, but those are words strung together. As Brother Jama said, outcomes, transparency, results. And I say this is not anything to be afraid of, and I'm speaking directly to those that are professionals in public safety. The move towards reform and changing systemic issues has been an ongoing process. It does not mean you can't do your job. But it does mean after you've done your job, you do not get to hold on to your arrest like a caged animal or like a pet. You must know that you have just done your job and it is now going through the criminal justice system and the right decisions will be made. I encourage you all to have patience, to not be caught up in your emotions, to support the right things. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that across our state, reform is happening. Why, in the legislature yesterday, there was a bill passed that is moving on, that is groundbreaking with regard to the use of force and holds that restrict the respiration of individuals. And there will be more to come. So again, Mike Schmidt, I thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I would encourage the press to also look at others in the movement, like Black Men and Black Women United, like Word is Bond, Reimagine Oregon. I think it is worth doing and giving the right amount of coverage so it doesn't just seem like a one-sided conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. And finally, Lakiana Drury, speaking of Word is Bond.
Thank you, Mike, for having me today. Thank you, members of the press, for being here. I think this is a very important stand that Mike is taking today, recognizing that there is a need for a new direction in the justice system in this county, in the state, and in this country. And I believe that Mike recognizes the history of his office and the role that it has played in where we are at today with the over-incarceration of Black people, with the over-prosecution of Black people. And as we announce these reforms and these changes to how we prosecute protesters exercising their First Amendment rights, it is important that we dial back to the issues that are originally at hand. As a teacher for 3 years here in Portland, as an executive director of a nonprofit that works to rewrite the narrative between young Black men and law enforcement, who are actually right now holding a workshop with local officers and working on that change, it is important that we look at the entire system of how we got here today and recognize that while we are on day 76 of protests here in the city, that the resistance of Black people goes back hundreds of years, and this is an ongoing process, and this is not new, and it would be a failure of local law enforcement and leaders in all positions to believe that this just started here, and that for years people have protested and asked for these changes, and only now that when people are in the streets are people reacting. And that we have to look at, when we are talking about the protests, understand that the protests are just part of a larger issue of Black lives in this city, and that must be the core issue that we focus on as elected leaders, as law enforcement, as community members. How do we uphold Black Lives Matter in this city? All Black lives, trans Black lives, little Black kids, right? We're getting ready to go back to school this fall. What kind of education system are we sending Black and brown children into? When we say, I can't breathe, when we talk about the knee that was in the neck of George Floyd, it's not just a neck in the terms of, or the knee in the neck in terms of law enforcement, but educationally, economically. What future are we creating for our community members? So the question is, will we choose to use our resources, very valuable and limited resources, to prosecute our neighbors who are exercising their First Amendment rights to support Black people? Or will we instead use those limited resources to uplift and battle against white supremacy at all levels within our city? We have to look at How do we affirm black communities? I've worked with students for all my years here in Portland, and they do not believe intrinsically inside them that there is a path for them. We barely get them across the finish line through high school with no path beyond that. When you look at the community violence, the shootings that have happened in this city in the last month, that is a direct result of a failure to provide resources to the black community and to uplift those individuals. And so I do not see that as we can blame them as the young people that see no future for themselves. When you look at the recent report that came out that still continues to show that black people are disproportionately stopped, searched, arrested, physically use of force against by the Portland Police Bureau, those are the issues that you have to talk about. What you talk about matters. Property damage cannot be over the top of black bodies. When you talk about protests, you must also talk about the changes that you are going to make in this city. I have 4 proposals on that. Fund our schools. I believe the best way to end community violence and gang violence in our city is to fund our schools, pay our teachers, make as much noise as we do about police officers as teachers and mental health workers. Reimagine our public safety. Reform is not enough. We must overhaul the system. We must reimagine what does policing look like. You must listen to the community members, and the community members have spoken. We don't need to see another community meeting about what do community members think. There is a plethora of information that exists out there. They have said it time and time again. Support economics of black people. We have to build wealth. We have to build housing. Give black people homes, right? The same homes that were torn down when I-5 was created, when Legacy Emmanuel Hospital was created. Restore those. And then number 4 is fix the justice system. As Ricardo had already said, the system isn't broken, it's working, it's producing outcomes that it was intended to produce, and so we must reimagine it, and that's what Mike is doing by announcing this and other changes that we hope to see him make, is reimagine where are we spending our time. Are we prosecuting young black boys and girls for crimes, or are we uplifting them in this city so that everybody can thrive? So Mike, I'm happy to stand with you today. I'm happy to stand with everybody. This is not an attack on officers and an affront to the system. It is saying that we must prioritize black lives and we must focus on our community. And until that, we cannot thrive. And Portland cannot be the city that it pretends to be. Thank you.
Thank you to all of our speakers. We are now going to open it up for questions with DA Schmidt. We are going to start first with media who are here present, and then we will go to the conference call line. So I'm going to just turn that up so they can hear properly, and we will start with those first questions now.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Alex. So this policy will apply to any charges that stem from the protest cases starting on May 29th. As Senior Deputy DA Nathan Vasquez mentioned, because of the COVID environment that we are in, the court processing of cases has slowed. So the vast majority of those cases are right now coming up for my office to make decisions on. So this will apply, and it's specific to the context of this protest. Great. In the back.
What do you say to people who say it promotes lawlessness in the city, and why are there no women on the transition team?
Yeah. Second question first. There are women on my transition team. Scheduling and setting this up at the last minute didn't allow for some of them to be able to join me. But they are a part of this policy and are helping me craft this. So I'm very grateful for their participation, and we can get you a list of everybody that's on that team. And your first question, remind me?
Yeah, I think I'm already seeing, because I tweeted this weekend in here, some people saying this just promotes lawlessness, and not possibly these misdemeanors promotes lawlessness in the city.
Yeah, you know, what we are doing is recognizing that the right to speak and have your voice heard is extremely important. If you are out there committing violence, as I said, if you're damaging property, those cases are going to be prosecuted. If you are a person who is out there demonstrating and you get caught up in the melee and you get arrested for that because you are out there having your voice heard, those are the types of cases we're talking about. OPB actually did an analysis looking at who are the protesters, which I thought was really illustrative. These are not people who are career criminals. They don't have criminal histories. In fact, most of them have not been through the criminal justice system before, and we do not expect that when they're out there protesting and demonstrating that not prosecuting these misdemeanors is going to lead to any other negative public safety outcomes.
So there's a reference to the number of felonies that have been charged, about 140, but only 45 have been issued. Can you explain what led to those decisions, and also your consideration for the charge of riot? What would that require to actually face prosecution?
Yeah, I'll handle the second question first, and then I'll turn it over to Senior DDA Vasquez, who's been reviewing the cases. The way that we wrote riot into this policy is so that if the charge of riot is accompanied by other charges in the policy, so disorderly conduct, interference with a peace officer, that is going to have a presumption of not being charged. However, if the charge of riot is accompanied with an assault or lighting things on fire, arson, or damaging property, that is the type of charge that we will take. So the way that we are kind of talking about it colloquially is riot present versus riot active. Are you somebody who was in the crowd with 5 or more people acting in a tumultuous way, but not yourself? We have no evidence that you yourself were engaging in harm, damage. That's going to be the presumptive not charging. The other side is if you're in that crowd and you are the person throwing and you are the person causing damage, that is the riot charge that we'll be taking. Senior DA Vasquez.
Max, if you could go ahead and just repeat that question for me so I can get it as accurate as I can.
I think you had said there were about 140 felony cases, 45 have been issued. How many have been declined, and why would they be declined?
Sure. So what happens with the felony cases is that in these events there are multiple reports. There can be voluminous video. There can be lots of follow-up investigations. So when you hear that there's still a lot pending review, it's because either we have went through it and we need some additional follow-up, or there's just still more work to be done. As far as the exact number that have been declined, I don't have that figure today. It's something we work on every day. We get new cases in, and a lot of them end up, when we're talking about that 100, in that we've reviewed them, but we need some additional information, such as, hey, there was a witness that was present that needs to be spoken with. Hey, we hear that there may be video because of some indications in the report. Can you please track that down? So we have had specific conversations with the Portland Police Bureau, and they are actively working on those issues and have assigned detectives to help us with that.
Yeah, I think it is my hope that when police officers, they are in a tough situation on these nightly protests. And what we've been seeing is that frequently people in the back of a crowd are throwing projectiles and things of that nature. And so when the police officers move in to make arrests, they hit people in the front of the crowd who might just be there not engaging in that type of behavior, and those are the people that are getting arrested. It is their ability and how they manage the control to make those lawful arrests, and they will decide what their strategy is in doing that. But it is my hope that when they are looking at referring cases for prosecution, that they are targeting and building cases on people who are actively destroying property, lighting things on fire, hurting people. That's where we want them to focus their time and attention, and we will prosecute those cases.
Those numbers are a little tough to pin down because, we don't necessarily work directly with them. We do have a lot of conversations with the federal partners. However, when federal officers were here making their own arrests, that was done completely through their channel, so we didn't have any effect on that. The ones that I can think of, only 2 offhand that went to the federal level that had some aspect of being touched by our office.
And just to follow up on that, are you concerned that the federal prosecutors are going to go after protesters who damaged county or city property as they have in the case of Edward Schmidt?
Federal prosecutors have to have jurisdiction to be able to prosecute cases, so there has to be a federal nexus as to why they can take those prosecutions. So I'm not concerned that they will be prosecuting protesters in other situations where it's not about federal property or some sort of nexus to their jurisdiction.
Okay, sorry, just a quick follow-up on that. They have, one of their explanations is that the county and city have received federal aid, therefore they have jurisdiction over county and city property, and that's the case with Edward Schmidt. I'm just wondering, can you respond to that? I mean, does that argument concern you at all as the district attorney?
I'll have to look more specifically into that one and get back to you.
And just sorry, last one. Do you support the federal indictment of Edward Schmidt?
I'm not familiar with that case specifically. DDA Vasquez probably has one.
So just so we're clear, the Oregon State Bar has certain ethical restrictions, so I'm not able to comment directly on a pending case or matter. The Shinzing case is one that's pending in federal custody. It is one that we are aware of and we have monitored, but it is currently being handled in the federal level. So there are those restrictions that in Oregon, as an attorney, we can't come forward and comment on the strength or weakness of a particular case or how it is. But that one is handled by the federal government this time. Okay.
Are there any other questions in the audience?
I have a quick one.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just curious what involvement you had, involvement the sheriff and maybe the chief of police had in forming this, kind of what conversations you've had with them, maybe after this policy came together, what those conversations.
Yeah, I reached out to the sheriff and Chief Lavelle on Friday of last week, and we have touched base since then. They have brought to me what their concerns are with the policy, and I've listened to that and incorporated some of their feedback. So got it to them in advance and had good dialogue.
Can you explain kind of what changes you might have made based on their input?
You know, I looked at the charge of riot and exactly how we were going to be directing the deputies to prosecute that charge. It's a felony charge. It can be, it's a very serious charge, and when accompanied by harm or damage, I wanted to make sure that that distinction was clear. So that's one of the changes that was made.
Nationwide, reform prosecutors and police in certain cities have butted heads over how they interpret the law. The Police Association president issued a statement last week to you, telling you to do your job, and that it was enabling these protesters. How do you envision working with police, given your commitments to reform and reimagine the system that was spoken about today?
Yeah, you know, I hope to have a very collaborative relationship. You know, I think if we are going to move forward, like Ricardo said, you know, it has to happen at all levels. And, you know, we're going to have to work some things out. The obligations of my office are a little bit different than the obligations of the Portland Police Association and the obligations of the Portland Police Bureau. So we all have what we're going for. Ultimately, it's public safety, but we might have different avenues. And I hope to have a collaborative relationship as we work through these things together, but it has to happen at all levels. Ricardo, did you want to say something?
Thanks, Mike. Just something real quick. Just as I'm hearing questions as well, a lot of questions about, you know, what does the interpretation of riot mean? How do different legal experts differ in their interpretations? I think it's also, again, important to realize what all these community members have spoken about today, right? It's about actually changing the system. That means changing the meaning of the law. A lot of the individuals here are also working in organizations that advocate in the state and local level for those changes. And again, I just want to remind folks that this policy is actually just one small piece of the larger conversation. We're still, again, even within this piece, working within the confines that have oppressed our communities. So, you know, it's important, again, to recognize that a larger change needs to be made to change a lot of the questions that you all had. I encourage you all to also ask questions to some of the community members that spent some time here today to explain what that larger vision is. You know, we were talking about criminal justice reform, but when we actually had a listening session this past weekend with community members and other county and local leaders on what criminal justice reform is, what police, public safety reform is. And one of the most important comments that was made there, which was something that was shared today, is that it's also about economic prosperity. It's also about education. How are we making sure that we're uplifting communities in those spaces? That's where it all starts, right? So it's a bigger question than just what this policy is. And I understand this press conference is about the policy, but just think about how small of a piece this actually is to the larger issue and the goal. And I hope in the future we can continue to have questions about what that larger effort is from the community.
We're now going to open it up to the conference call members, and we are going to start with Nick Budnick from the Portland Tribune. After Nick will be Lars Larson. So Nick, are you there? You can unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question. And I'll have DA Schmidt step up to the podium so he can hear as well.
Thank you so much. I'm wondering, could District Attorney Schmidt please talk a little more about the process that was used to come to this policy change? And also, next part of the question is, do you intend to use this in other areas of prosecution policy? And what is your main focus of where to deploy this next? Where's your next focus of change, I guess, after you talk about the process? Thank you.
Right. So the question was about the process and how this policy was developed. So I put together a community transition team. We have gotten together twice, once to have this conversation at a high level and then once to review what I brought back to them with some ideas, and they helped me kind of craft how this looked together. I also worked with members of my office, my executive team, Senior DDA Vasquez, and members of the protest review team to help give me feedback on how this office policy would function. And so I also want to thank them for their participation because they gave me very excellent feedback as well. And then, as I've already acknowledged, once we had a policy that I thought was getting close, I wanted to invite the feedback of Portland Police and the Sheriff's Office. We got this over to Mayor's office in advance. So, you know, getting it out to them for a little bit more comment and feedback. So that's the process. On how we envision, will this policy impact how I approach other crimes in the future? You know, I think the process that I just talked about will inform how I approach other prosecutions in the future. I want to be, and I'm being very intentional about involving community, but then also involving law enforcement, involving members of my office who are the ones closest to the ground in implementing these things. They have the experience and the expertise. They are extremely dedicated public servants. I'm fortunate to be working with them. And so I think you can say, what you can take from this is that my approach to developing this policy, it is the same approach that I will be using to look at other policies as I finish out DA Underhill's term and then look to beginning my own on January 1st.
Great. And then the one area I thought was, what is the next big area? You must have thought to yourself, okay, I like this process, or I don't like this process, but here's what I want to look at next.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. Yep, appreciate that. So looking at other things, you know, we're going to look at different areas of police accountability, how my office handles cases, and re-review those types of policies. So we're having those conversations now. You know, during the campaign, I talked about how I do not like cash bail. I think that it creates inequities. We're going to look at how my office is using, you know, making recommendations for that and what changes we can make within a system that still does have cash bail. It's not completely in our hands, but what things can we do? So those are a couple of the policy areas that I think are coming up, but really I intend to take this time between now and January 1st to thoughtfully go through that, have a good dialogue and community feedback. This was a policy that I felt like, because of the timing of cases hitting our system, needed to come out now. That does not necessarily mean that all of my policies are going to be rolling out in the next weeks. I really am going to take a very thoughtful and contemplative approach to how we address these things in this county. And there are a lot of good things that have been done for a really long time, and I need to be up to speed on that, and then just look at areas where we think we can do things better.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick, for your question. Lars Larson, you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Lars, are you there? All right, we will now move on to Courthouse News Service.
Hi, thanks so much for taking my question. I was wondering, you said there have been about 450 arrests. Do you have data on the racial breakdown of protest arrestees? And I'm wondering if there's any evidence of racial bias and who is targeted for arrest.
I'm going to turn that over to Senior Deputy DA Nathan Vasquez. I think we're looking at that, but maybe he can give you some.
Thank you for that question. That is something that we are carefully kind of tracking, but with kind of this past weekend's events, which brought in quite a few more cases, it wouldn't be accurate for me to give those numbers at this time, because it just, with all those new cases and trying to get caught up and up to speed with that, but we are working on that, and that is something that we're keeping a very close eye on. And we're very lucky that in our team we have a lot of excellent prosecutors. In fact, Ms. Moda, who's here today, who is a fantastic prosecutor and a woman of color, is helping us keep a close eye on that and monitor that carefully.
Okay, can I ask one more?
Go ahead.
I'm curious how you expect this policy to change police behavior on the ground. Last night, for example, there was a line was formed, and then there was kind of a standoff, and then protesters started to throw eggs, and I saw eggs and 2 plastic water bottles. And that was what prompted the police to push their line forward and to arrest several people by like throwing them to the ground, tackling them, pepper spraying them. So I'm just wondering, like, in those situations, that seems like the kind of arrest that you're talking about that you might decline to prosecute. Are you expecting this policy to change, to like stop those kinds of arrests, or to change police behavior?
So you're right. I think those are the types of arrests that this policy would encompass if those people themselves were not throwing things at the officers that were causing damage. You know, I think announcing this policy so that it's clear that those types of cases won't be charged, that doesn't change the fact that police officers have the right and ability to manage the protests the way that they see fit, but that those cases won't be charged, and that we will be focusing our efforts on cases where property destruction or harm are happening. And so it would be my hope that we could see less of those types of charges referred to our office.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we'll do the Associated Press in Portland.
Hi, this is Jillian. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I wanted to go back to the question that was asked about the breakdown of the arrests by race and by age, and I've noticed that you know, when you look at it, you know, Portland is overwhelmingly, as we all know, a very white city, overwhelmingly, and a lot of the people out there are white, and I'm wondering if there is any, have you seen any indication in these
I think a better person to answer that question is Lakiana Drury, so I'll ask him to come back up.
Yeah, could you repeat just the end of that question again?
Yes, the question was basically that, just by the fact that we are all in Portland, and Portland is, a majority, predominantly white city, that a lot of the people who are getting arrested are white, and I'm wondering if that, if you're seeing any changes in the thought processes of white protesters, or if this is influencing the policy at all going forward.
Yeah, I can't say about the policy, although I hope it would, but to equate what white Portlanders at protests are experiencing is anywhere near to the experience of black people under white supremacy, there's just no correlation to that at all. You could go back as far as you want to look at the experiences of black people in the 60s and the 40s and the 30s with Jim Crow, the terrorism that was unleashed on our communities, the lynchings that happened that went unreported, where there was no press, where there was no Twitter to document it, no social media to bring it up, the fact of slavery, the fact that even arrested as a white individual, you still benefit from white privilege. There's just no comparison to that, so that's what I would say on that issue.
Right, and I want to clarify, I wasn't saying that there was. My question was whether or not, because white people are out there getting arrested now, if that is helping bring light to that.
I think there's definitely a conscious shift of white people really understanding since the murder, of George Floyd, an understanding of the deepness of white supremacy, and an understanding, hopefully a more understanding of what it means to be anti-racist. I would definitely say that has increased. But there's still a long way to go, and it has to go all the way to the people in power to make those changes. When you have everyday white folks, people like to categorize the protesters as just like this radical element within Portland. These are everyday neighbors. They were in Kenton, my neighborhood, business owners, everyday individuals, mothers, fathers that are part of this, and so I do feel that there's a shift in that, and their understanding of it, and their willingness to put their bodies on the line and do real allyship and use their privilege to change the system.
Thank you.
And we have one final question from KOIN, Coin TV. I just wanted to see if they are on the line because they did ask for the conference call. Is Wayne Haverly on the phone call? With no response, I will go ahead and read the question from Coin. Oh, are you there, Wayne?
I am. Sorry, it took me a second here. But, yeah, I think we had a question there. Just Sunday night, thank you for taking my question, by the way, but Demetria Hester was arrested, the gal who was a victim in the Max attack a few years ago. She was arrested on Sunday night and released. We wanted to know why she was released, what led to the events there.
This is DA Mike Schmidt answering your question. So, like all cases, now as my office is reviewing cases as they come in, we will still continue to review every single police report, noting that this policy talks about a presumption to decline certain types of charges. And in the review of those reports, my office took a look at that case and felt and made the decision that that case specifically falls within the confines of this policy to be presumptively dismissed.
And then just one more question. The felony arrests that you have made on arson specifically, do you have a number for that, on how many people have been arrested for arson and what the status of those individuals is?
I'm going to have Senior DDA Nathan Vasquez come up here and answer that question for you.
It looks like that currently we have going to put this as approximately 7 cases where we have had an arrest either for arson 1 or arson 2. And I apologize, let me back that up. There are 3 cases for arson 1. The other ones were assaults. So we have 3, and I know that those cases are currently either have been issued or proceeding in our office through the investigative process.
Okay, has everybody been pretty much released on bail, or is there anyone that's been held through this?
So I would say that pretty much all cases have either been released through the recog process or have bailed out. There are a few exceptions, and most of those exceptions are due to other outstanding issues such as warrants in other jurisdictions.
Thank you.
With that, that concludes our press conference. I appreciate everyone who has come out here today.
Tim Gordon, KGW.
Oh, Tim, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question. I was hoping I could ask you well before the news.
Yep, go ahead, Tim.
Great. Okay, appreciation.
Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time. Hey, so I can ask you about a specific instance, and I have a follow-up question, it's a little general, but there's been reporting about a man allegedly throwing explosive devices into a crowd of demonstrators at Laurel Park early Saturday morning. Several people have identified him. Portland police have now identified a man in a video they want to talk to. What do you know about that case, and what can you say about it?
Senior DDA Vasquez will handle that.
Thank you for the question, and I would say that this is a question that's representative of many cases that are still out there and pending, where our office is aware of this incident. We have been monitoring it. We have had discussions with Portland Police, but until that person is formally identified, the investigation is complete, and it's referred to our office, we will not have an opportunity to review and make a charging decision. But we are certainly aware of that and monitoring it closely.
Thank you so much, and I figured that might be the answer. I just have a more general question if I could.
Go ahead.
So, sir, protests are now routinely going into neighborhoods. Some would say police are pushing them there, heckling even. But regardless, they're going to neighborhoods where neighbors are now feeling somewhat terrorized, I guess maybe a strong word, but where things are being thrown, lasers are being used on neighbors in neighborhoods in Kent and Southeast Portland. What do you have to say about that to those people that are bothered by that in their neighborhoods are being bothered? Thank you.
Yeah, so as it pertains to this policy, the way that is going to be looked at is again, if there is damage, property damage, destruction, fires, things of that nature, we are going to handle those cases. Where those are not present, and it's one of the aforementioned cases, there's going to be a presumptive declination to issue charges there. So that's how those will be impacted by this case or by this policy.
All right, thank you very much, you guys. We do have